Welcome to Perspectives on Social Justice, where we continue to give the world a voice. I am Lairalaine White, your host. Our conversation this time starts on the nexus between the church and social justice. Should the church be universally issues pertaining to racism, politics, and other systemic vulnerabilities? Anybody can start.
Well, I will. First of all, as the African Methodist Episcopal Church, there is nothing that we shy away from as it relates to social justice. I can say that. I can say that as a denomination on which we were founded. In that, now, of course, individuals are individuals. But from this individual, it is very important that we are exercising our voices. Our voices are our capital. And we must stand up, sit in, do what is needed to be done in perspective of what is going on in our particular areas. The marching and advocating, or I'll just say advocating, period. Advocating looks different for everybody in their context. There are people who are advocating, but they're advocating by going and going to school board meetings. There are people who are advocating by being a problem solver in their community. There are people who are advocating by carrying picket signs and showing up at the Gold Dome. There are people who advocate in different ways, but it is our responsibility to care for those who do not yet know how to care for themselves. And that's what we are to do as anchor institutions. If we truly are those as church bodies, then our responsibility is to be a voice, not for what we think the community needs, but we are to be a voice for what the community indicates it needs from us. And so I think it is very important that we are using our voice and our capital to make a difference in the lives of people across the board, no matter what justice is being taken away or challenged. I'll say that. What you think, Dr. Fortson? Shelton? How about y'all?
Well, I think you've spoken. You hit the nail on the head, as we say down here in the South. You hit the nail on the head. I think when you talk about the church, and I heard Dr. White say the church universal. I think the church universal harkens itself back to Matthew 23 and 23 when Jesus was saying, you paid your tithes, you came to church, you did what you were supposed to do, but you forgot the weightier things. You forgot the more important things, which were to love justice. He started with justice. At the end of the day, I believe, Cornel West said it. Justice is what love looks like in public. At the end, and I think that we should be that voice. But then when you talk about those of us who pastor congregations in the Black church, and we all know what the Black church has meant to our community, period, from the Underground Railroad to what it means today. When the George Floyd incident happened, when the George Floyd tragedy, that senseless violence happened, it was the church that coalesced and brought people together, the Black church that did that. And I think that we are still that voice in the community. Yeah, we love justice. We execute mercy and faith in our communities. And if we are not the voice, where would that voice come from? Who would do it? Who would say it? Who would speak, as we like to say, the unadulterated truth? We're not there. I believe that those of us who are preachers in the Black church, we're not bought. We're not sellouts. At the end of the day, we believe in justice. And if God is not a God of justice, then what we do in vain. Period. The end. what we do in vain. So that's why the church has been in the position it's been in. And I think that if we are going to be a relevant 21st century church, we better stay there. We better find ways to stay there.
Amen. I did my colleagues on the panel as well. Micah 6:8 tells us, what does the Lord require thee? To do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with thy God, and to do justice. And so when people want to argue, do we do justice from the pulpit? I said, the Bible is justice. Jesus' death, birth, death, and resurrection was justice. It was all political. So we can never not talk about, can't do political in the church. The whole Bible is political. Everything about it is empire. So we got to talk about it because when our people walk outside the doors, it's political propaganda that they have to go through. So yes, we talk about it. We talk about racial equality. We talk about even racial equality in the hood when we're killing one another. And so we're always talking about justice no matter what. I'm part of the United Church of Christ, the UCC. And so justice is the form of the ministry that we do. We do justice on everything, from water to trees to racial to everything. But justice is where our people stand. It's where we fight. The church has always been the pillar. As my colleagues already said, the Black church has always been the pillar for justice, have always been the truth to power, has always been the voice to the voiceless, has always been the voice to those that are in the margins, have always been the pedagogy of the oppressed. It's been all of that, what the church is doing. And it is our command and our demand to do justice. That's what the Lord has required of thee, to do justice. And so we're doing what has already been required of us to do. And for those who don't speak it, then we're wondering what they're required to do.
Right. Absolutely. And that's definitely been my platform all along, is really being critical of those who don't speak it, who are charged to speak it, but don't. And so, I challenge all of my colleagues in the ministry to that do not, to take a stand and step forward and be heard, because it's very relevant, especially in the African American community. We've had some controversial issues to come up, even since the end of the pandemic, or I say we're moving into what they're calling the endemic. And in the wake of the happenings in denominations, with regard to same-sex marriage, homosexuality, sexual equity, I'm curious to know, there's a clarion call, I think, that's being sounded, and a lot of denominations are responding in some very controversial ways. We have the planned split of the United Methodist Church on this issue. We've got things that are going on in the Catholic Church. I'm curious to know from my colleagues here, what is your position on, especially when it comes to equal pay and sexual equity in the church?
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and jump in. We talk about the LGBTQIA community. The UCC has always been on the forefront for that. In 2005, we did the vote to have same-sex marriages. And I have to admit, when our vote went past, not every congregation was for it. Those who were in the South and the Southeast pretty much left the denomination because they didn't believe in that. And so you will get some pushback, even in denominational stuff, that because our churches are autonomous, that they don't have to do it if they choose not to. And so some churches have left because of that. But again, what does the Lord require of thee? To do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with our God. And so if we're telling people that they're not obligated or they can't get into the kingdom of God because of who's in the bedroom, well, we got to talk about sexual sins and all of it. We can't just talk about homosexuality. We don't say nothing to the adulterer. We don't say nothing to the fornicators. Those who's incest. We don't talk about them. Then we don't talk about it. We got to talk about it all. We don't just sound like the Bible. We got to take the whole context in mind. And so when we look at that, when we look at equality, especially women in ministry, as me and my sister here are women in ministry, what is the equality of there? You know, people don't like women pastors. Well, why you don't like them? Because the words say, what the words say. You know, so now we have to dissect what the word said, and what does that look like? And is there equality in that? Of course it's not. Women been fighting for women's rights since 19 something. I mean, we had to get an amendment just to have rights. So we've been fighting that fight for a long time, and we're definitely going to fight it in the church, even though it's predominantly women in the church. We still fight the fight, and sometimes our fight is with women, as women clergy as it is anyone else. So, you know, the fight for equality is just always going to be. And so we just stand in power and presence and still fight the good fight because we're worth it. And God has called all of us to speak a word. And so we speak it well, and we're great leaders. You can see our Supreme Court justice leader. So we are doing the doggone thing. And so to look at justice, we have to look at it the gamut. We can't just pick and choose what justice we want to do. For the word says to do justice, period. It didn't name it. It just said to do it. And so we have to be mindful of all the justice for all the people, for all the nations, and for all the tongues. That's what the word says, and that's what we preach and teach.
Yeah. So my question is, and Dr. Buckson, I want to hear from you. My question is, what has the church done with respect to ministering to women, ministering to the needs, the emotional and spiritual needs of women in particular? We've talked about equality and equity in clergy. That's an ongoing conversation. But universally, and even in the Black church, what has the church done to minister to the spiritual, specifically to the spiritual and spiritual needs of women?
Well, I don't know how to, that's very broad from this standpoint that just like with any of this, there are people who, where that's their calling, right? Where that's their lane. And there are some who I would rather it not be their lane because they do not have the empathy, the compassion, they don't have the giftedness, they don't have the interest in really sitting with anybody. So that's why there's this pick and choose of who I will and who I won't address. And so I started in the Second Episcopal District of the AME Church, which is I'm from Baltimore. I saw many women in ministry, and I had a female who became my mother in ministry, who that was her heart. Her heart was building sisters, period. And so I think it had that. I'm not saying that my pastor did not, but my pastor did the whole church. And he knew enough, like I hope we all know enough, and I'm sure we do. We know that you have to get the right people on the bus, and you got to put them in the right seats so that ministry works. And I think that it is very important as leaders that we are looking for people who are going to meet the specific needs of the congregation where we are. Like, I think it's important that we have models. I get, even as sisters and brothers here, right? It says something that we stand, Reverend Kim, as pastors in a pulpit. Mm-hmm. And I say that because when I was laity, I saw another lay sister stand in the pulpit at my church that had never had a female as a pastor, right? Never had a female as an assistant pastor. But I saw her stand because we had what was called lay day. And they chose, and I heard the voice of the Lord say to me that day, you can do that. because we put models and the leaders put models in places that would help somebody see themselves. Likewise, my sister has multiple sclerosis, and she is not ambulatory. She's in a wheelchair. There's a gentleman who comes from across the street at the senior facility who is also not ambulatory. He comes in a wheelchair. My sister was dancing with the liturgical dance ministry in her wheelchair, in her electric chair. And the gentleman was excited. And he said, I saw myself, right? And it's important whenever we are ministering, when we are looking at our congregations, at our communities, that we are looking for positive examples to show people so that they can see the Lord moving and hear the Lord speak to them because they can see it.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Good answer.
Absolutely.
I like that. I like that.
Well, as the lone male voice
Right now.
on this call, I stand in solidarity with my strong Black sisters who have spoke so profoundly about the position of women in ministry. To Reverend Kim, Pastor Kim's point, when you say we're gonna talk about one, we got to talk about them all. But what I always like to say is Jesus raised the bar so high, he said you can't even think about it. And so if you want to talk about where we cross the line into sin, Jesus raised that bar so high you can't judge somebody else. And so my denomination, definitely the Church of God in Christ, has a public stance on it, and I think that many of us will respond in ways that the Spirit leads us to respond to certain public declarations. But listen, this is what I know for a fact is power is perceived as much as it is real. And the Black church is 80% female. At the end of the day, I think if we have the voice, if we have enough courage, if we have enough strength and to empower those women, then we really, at the end of the day, we have to understand that, ladies, women's ministries run this church. If women close if the ladies' ministries close their purse strings, there won't be a church. And you got to understand that. You got to know it, and you got to be open to that. I think that what has happened is we have I don't want to say I hear Malcolm X saying you've been bamboozled, you've been led astray, but women have absolute power in this church, and I think that when we talk about women preachers, when we talk about them being the mouthpieces, let's think about these four ladies that undergirded Jesus's ministry. Let's talk about, though, we can't start to talk about what we're not going to allow, or women not being able to engage in ministry. Some of the most powerful ministers I know in this world, including my mother, you understand, push the gospel message. I'm going to get in trouble way further than just about any man I know. And so I stand in solidarity with my Black sisters and with women's ministry. I will say this, though, in my denomination's defense, the Church of God in Christ Department of Women is an amazing structure. It allows women to engage in ministry from the top down. Do they call it preachers? Well, we can get into semantics, but they allow women to engage in ministries from the top down, from clergy all the way down to the lay member. And so I think if we can continue to be the voice of equity in ministry, that I think in this 21st century church will change how it looks, not just the narrative, but how it looks in reality. I believe we can do that.
Yeah, and I think and the AME church is pretty new as it relates to regulations relative to women in ministry. we've had women in ministry, women who are ministering for quite some time. I mean, like you said, women have always been ministering, right? And at some point, I hope that we will begin to, just like we talked about, segmenting who we gonna judge and who can come in and who can and all that kind of stuff. I think we just need to look for those who are doing the work of the Lord. And sometimes we have to be internally okay with standing flat-footed and doing what we do as ministers, clergy and lay.
That's
And
right.
know that there is not a man or woman who called me to ministry. I am the person that I am because of the fact that I have seen models of people who understood that very fact, that they worked as unto God and not as unto humanity. And that is so important when it comes to how we model before. Y'all hear I'm on this model kick, right? About how we model before people. And we have to be the advocates that speak up. Sometimes we have to be the advocates that step out of the way and call somebody else's name. Because when we look around and we see, when I first came to Georgia, I went to an annual conference and I came from, again, Baltimore. I wasn't used to growing up seeing only men, and I only saw men. And immediately my psyche was like, something wrong here. Wait a minute. They're not on the program. Like this just doesn't happen. But there also has to be an intentionality about teaching a person like me and showing a person like me that it should be odd when I see that. Right. And then getting into a space where I am able to call somebody else's name, whether I'm male or female. I need to be able to be looking out for people who are skilled and gifted and call their name so that they can also get into spaces that they never would get into, but maybe you were allowed to get into.
Mm-hmm. I love that. That's very well. That's very well put, Dr. Buckson. I really appreciate your perspective on that. I think my earlier question about what did the church do? What has the church done to minister to the emotional and spiritual needs of women? Come from that's really a whole nother broadcast, because we could talk about ministry and we can talk about empowering women to take leadership positions and empowering those in leadership to recognize, to give that recognition that's needed. But at the end of the day, even as church leaders, even as clergy persons, we're charged to minister to all of to everyone in the church. When we are present, when we as preachers are present in the midst of politics, in the midst of any type of controversy, when we are present in the midst of good things, when we are present in the midst of sickness, when we are present in the midst of anything that impacts our congregation and communities around the world, we have a very powerful presence, and we need to make sure that we use that presence to the glory of God. That's what we're called to do. And we see the evidence of that. An attorney for one of the 3 white men standing trial in the death of Ahmaud Arbery in Georgia says that he did not want any more Black pastors in the courtroom. That is part of the evidence of the impact that we have. And a lot of times we can go and we don't even have to say a word. Just be present. And on that note, I'm going to end this discussion. We will, it's always great to have my colleagues. I've got some outstanding colleagues here that have participated in this conversation. But on that, and we're going to go ahead and close this out. And with that, I want to quote the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King when he says that whatever affects one directly affects us all indirectly. Because I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. And this is the interrelated structure of reality. And on that note, I will bid everyone good night.
Good night, you guys.